FBI estimates in the United States alone at any given time there are 25 to 50 active serial killers. Now, imagine across the world. Nilsen's father, Olaf Magnus Nilsen, was a Norwegian soldier evacuated to Scotland after the Nazis conquered his home country in World War II. His mother, a local fisherman's daughter named Elizabeth Duthie White, married Olaf in May of 1942. Together, they had 3 children, 2 sons, Olaf Jr. and Dennis, and a daughter named Sylvia. Olaf was never interested in starting a family, and the couple divorced in 1948. As a result, the paternal role of their children was fulfilled by the maternal grandfather, Andrew. As a young child, Dennis was very close to his grandfather and would eagerly wait for him while he was at sea. On October 31st, 1951, a month before Nilsen's 6th birthday, White died of a heart attack while he was fishing in the North Sea. His body was brought to the family home for burial, and Nilsen's mother let him see it, telling him that his grandfather was sleeping. The loss of his grandfather had a profound effect in Nilsen's personality. He became quiet and reserved and would shun other adults' attempts to offer him affection. His favorite activity was to travel to the harbor alone and watch the fishing boats as they arrived and departed. During one of these excursions, in either 1954 or 55, Nilsen somehow became submerged in the water and was almost dragged up to sea. He panicked at first, but once he ran out of oxygen, he had a near-death experience, which caused him to calm down and believe that his grandfather was coming to save him. He was then pulled out of the water by other youngsters. Shortly after this incident, Nilsen's mother remarried to another man, and the family subsequently moved to the inland village of Strick. With the onset of puberty, Nilsen realized that he wasn't heterosexual, but he was unsure if he was gay or bisexual, because the boys he was attracted to looked suspiciously like his sister. To test his attractions, Nilsen once fondled both his sister and brother as they slept, but his brother woke up in the middle of the act. Since then, Nilsen was bullied and called a hen, Scottish slang for a girl, by his brother. Nilsen decided that he would leave Strichen and join the Army Cadet Force at age 14 as a previous step to sign for the British Army. After finishing high school, his first destination was Osnabrück, a city in West Germany. There, Nilsen drank high quantities of alcohol to reduce his shyness and help him socialize. One time, he passed out and woke up on the floor of an apartment owned by a German friend. Though no sexual activity took place, this incident became a source for Nilsen's fantasy about having sex while one of his parties was mostly immobile, and he would pretend to be passed out during later drinking sessions in hopes that one of his partners made sexual advances on him. In 1967, Nilsen was redeployed to Aden, South Yemen, and assigned to the Al-Mansoura prison. The violence from the pro-independence groups led to the abductions or ambush murders of several of Nilsen's companions. Dennis himself was nearly abducted by a local taxi driver once. The man had knocked him unconscious and placed him in the trunk of his car. However, Nilsen regained consciousness before reaching their destination. When the abductor opened the trunk with the intention of dragging him out, Nilsen knocked him to the floor with a jack handle, beat him until he was unconscious, and left him locked in his own trunk. Now granted his own room, Nilsen began to use a freestanding mirror to simulate sex with a masculine partner. His fantasies became ambiguously necrophilic after he discovered the painting Raft of the Medusa. Following brief stays in Britain and Cyprus, he was destined again to Germany, where he hired a prostitute so he could have intercourse with a woman for the first time. Nilsen found the experience overrated and depressing, and concluded that he was indeed homosexual. Nilsen's first fatal victim was 14-year-old Stephen Holmes, whom he encountered at the Cricklewood Arms pub on December 30th, 1978, after Holmes attempted unsuccessfully to buy alcohol there. Nilsen had been drinking heavily and believed that Holmes was around 17. He invited him to his home, and they drank together until he fell asleep. The following morning, Nilsen awoke and found Holmes still asleep on his bed. Fearing that Holmes would leave him to spend New Year's Eve alone, Nilsen strangled Holmes with a necktie until he was unconscious, and then drowned the boy in a bucket of water in the kitchen. Nilsen masturbated twice over Holmes' body and then hid it under the floorboards. 8 months later, he built a pyre behind his home and burned the body. In October, he met a student from Hong Kong, Andrew Ho, in another pub and lured him to his apartment with the promise of sex, but Ho escaped when Nilsen tried to strangle him. Nilsen was questioned about this incident by police, but Ho declined to press charges. 2 months later, Nilsen met a Canadian, Kenneth Akendon, in a pub and offered to show him several London landmarks. After giving him the tour, Nilsen invited Akendon over to his apartment. Then, he strangled him to death while he was listening to music. The following morning, Nilsen staged Akendon's body in a number of suggested positions, photographed it each time, and watched television with the corpse by his side. Afterward, he wrapped it in plastic bags and hid it under the floorboards. During the next 2 weeks, Nilsen dug up and reburied Akendon's body 4 separate times. Every time after he dug up the body and before he reburied it, he would place the body on the armchair where it remained while Nilsen drank and watched television. The next victim was 16-year-old hitchhiker Martin Duffy, who was first strangled in his sleep and then drowned in the kitchen sink. Afterward, Nilsen took Duffy's body to the bathroom and bathed with him. He kissed, complimented, and masturbated over Duffy's body repeatedly over the 2 following days. When the body became bloated, Nilsen hid it under the floorboards. Nilsen's criminal activity increased starting in August of 1980. After trying to spray the bodies with deodorant and insecticide to eliminate maggots and odors, he dismembered the bodies and burned them in a waste ground behind his home. In October, when Nilsen's landlord decided to renovate the property, Nilsen disposed of his latest victim earlier and moved it to an attic flat in 23 Cranley Gardens in the suburb of Muswell Hill. Though Nilsen continued to invite men, he refrained from committing murders for a while because he did not have access to the garden, nor did he have enough space under his floorboards. The only incidents in 6 months involved Toshimitsu Osawa, a Japanese chef who fled when he saw Nilsen coming at him with a tie, and Paul Nobbs, who woke up in the morning feeling dizzy and with red eye. He went to the hospital at Nilsen's suggestion. He was later informed that someone had tried to strangle him. However, neither man reported Nilsen to the police. In March of 1982, Nilsen invited John Howlett for a drink. After Howlett fell asleep in his bed, Nilsen sat by his side and continued drinking before he tried to strangle him. However, Howlett awoke and struggled with Nilsen, almost overpowering him. He was eventually strangled to unconsciousness 3 times. After Nilsen realized that he was still breathing, he filled the bathtub with water and drowned Howlett for 5 minutes. Nilsen subsequently dismembered the body, flushed the flesh and organs down the toilet, threw the bones in the trash. 2 months later, the scenario was repeated with Carl Stoddard, who slept in a sleeping bag. Stoddard awoke to Nilsen strangling him and was then taken to the bathtub and forcefully immersed. Believing that he had killed Stoddard, Nilsen placed Stoddard on an armchair. However, he realized that Stoddard was still alive when his dog Bleep jumped over and began to lick Stoddard's face. Because Bleep never interacted with the corpses, Nilsen decided to resuscitate Stoddard, and later told him that he had accidentally strangled himself after being stuck in the sleeping bag's zipper. Over the next 2 days, Stoddard fell unconscious several times and had flashes of Nilsen strangling and drowning him. Stoddard asked Nilsen about the memories, but Nilsen explained that Stoddard would have nightmares whenever he was stuck in the zip, and that he would place Stoddard in cold water to help him recover from shock. Nilsen invited Stoddard to stay over again, but he declined. Nilsen's next victim was Graham Allen, who was offered a meal and subsequently strangled while he was eating an omelet. Nilsen would later claim that Allen had accidentally choked on it. Allen's body was left in the bathtub for 3 days, and Nilsen had asked for a day off from work so he could dismember it. On January 26, 1983, Nilsen killed his final victim, Stephen Sinclair, who was strangled while in an alcohol and drug-induced stupor on Nilsen's armchair. After killing him, Nilsen noticed that Sinclair's wrists were bandaged, removed them, and discovered that Sinclair had tried to kill himself only a few days prior. Nilsen then bathed the corpse, applied talcum powder to it, and arranged mirrors around the bed before undressing himself and laying naked next to the dead youth. After several hours, Nilsen kissed the body, wished it good night, and fell asleep alongside it. The body was subsequently dismembered and the parts placed in different bags, with Sinclair's own bandages being used to seal them. On February 4th, Nilsen complained to estate agents about the drains being clogged, seemingly unaware that it was the body parts of his own victims clogging them. When plumber Michael Catton informed Nilsen that he had found the drain packed with a fleshy substance and small bones, Nilsen joked that someone was flushing down Kentucky Fried Chicken. Catton said that his supervisor returned the next morning to clear the drain, but found that someone else had done it. Suspicious, they examined the pipes leading to the drain and found more bones and scraps of flesh and a pipe coming from the top floor of the house where Nilsen resided. After informing the police, a pathologist confirmed that the bones were human and that one of the flesh scraps was part of a neck bearing marks typical of ligature strangulation. As 3 officers waited for Nilsen to come home, they noticed the smell of decomposition at his front door. Nilsen first feigned shock when the officers told him that the blockage was by human remains, but when they told him to tell the location of the rest of the body, he led them to one of the closets containing remains. When asked if there were more, Nilsen said that it was a long story and that he would tell it all at the police station. While being driven there, an officer asked Nilsen if the remains belonged to one person or 2. Nilsen looked out the window and replied, 15 or 16 since 1978. Nilsen soon made a full confession and led officers to the lot where he had destroyed the remains in Melrose Avenue. However, he claimed that he had no intention to kill until the moment right before a murder. He also claimed that he ignored the reason for the murders, adding that he'd hoped the police would tell him. On November 4th, 1983, Nilsen was found guilty of 6 murders and 1 attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole for 25 years. The possibility of parole was eliminated in 1994 by Home Secretary Michael Howard, who replaced Nilsen's sentence with one of whole life order. Nilsen reacted to the news by saying that he accepted his life sentence and had no desire to be free again. On May 12, 2018, Nilsen died as a result of complications following a stomach surgery at the age of 72.